Hi everybody, this is Melissa here at Fort Mountain Quilting, and today is Tutorial Tuesday. And Tutorial Tuesday is on making a project with using Quilt-as-you-go. So what we're going to make is these fantastic wine, or if you want to call it water bottle carriers. So these are really nice gifts that you can do. Doesn't take too long to get them done. So I did this one in K-Facet material, and this one we've done in Tim Holtz material, and then I'm going to work on the next one on a Christmas theme. So these are really quick gifts that you can do, really fantastic. I thought they would be cute since Christmas is coming up and you're looking for things to do for your loved ones or your families. All right, so I'm gonna move these out of the way real quick, and wanted to show you some of the supplies that you need. I also wanted to point out there are other things that you can do as Quilt-as-you-go. So first, I'm going to start off down here at the bottom. We have these already, this one sample's already done up. So this is a cat placemat, and this is a Quilt-as-you-go. So you can see it's a nice quick gift here you could do. A real quick project with just using some scraps. And then we have one that we done with the dog. We also have it in a tree skirt. I don't have the sample done yet of that one. And today we are working on the Quilt-as-you-go wine carriers or bottle carriers. And in this package, it does include enough interfacing to do 3 of these wonderful items here. All right, so let's go over the tools that you need in order to do this. So you're gonna, of course, need your scissors and a rotary cutter, and it's helpful to have, I love Quilter Select, so get your Quilter Select rulers out. Different sizes are great, smaller ones, you don't have to have the big one, but the smaller ones work fantastic with this. Of course, you need a packet of the June Taylor interfacing, and it's already pre-printed for you. I like to use the basting spray. This helps hold our material to our interfacing so it doesn't shift on us while we're sewing. Doesn't take much of this, so this you can use for multiple projects. I also like to use my pin holder because it's just easier to get what I need out of it. And if you notice, some of them are labeled and numbered, and I'll show you why that's important for this project. All right, so let's get started here. So what I did is I went ahead and pre-cut everything so that it's ready to go. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take a piece of material about 1/4 yard, and we need it for our backing. So I've already pre-cut out our interfacing, and if you can see here, it's got all the numbers on it. So now what we need to do is we need to attach our backing on here, because we're going to quilt this as we go. So when you're done, it's a quilted project. You don't have to do any quilting after that. So what I like to do is make sure you're working on a surface that won't get gummed up, because this basting spray is glue. And then so what we're going to do is we're going to just spray a little bit of this. I'm spraying it on the interfacing, and what this does is it's just enough to make it where it will stick to the material. And so we're going to do this. We're going to stick it on here nice and flat, and then the next step is I'm going to meet you over at the sewing machine. So we got this done here, so let's go to the sewing machine and start sewing. All right, we're here at the sewing machine. So the first thing we need to do is we are going to sew along the outside line here. And this is to attach the back, but it's also to give us a line so that when we cut out your pieces, you'll have something to go by. So it's really important when you're doing this that you pick a thread that is a different color than your backing, because you need to be able to see it. And that's just for this portion of it. The quilting process, you can use whatever thread that you want to use. So I chose just to leave a natural beige in here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew all the way around the perimeter of the bag. All right, I recommend you using a 1/4 inch foot. There are 2 different kinds. For this project, I would recommend not using one with the guard. I would use one that does not have the guard, because you're sewing in the middle of fabric and the guard's really not going to help you with that. So let me attach my foot here. All right, and then I'm going to start sewing all the way around the perimeter of it. And let's see. And as you notice, I'm sewing on the top of it. And all this line is doing is it's just giving me a point to know where the edge of the bag is going to be. Okay. And this will be a good time. We're going to cut out for a second, and then we'll come right back in. Okay, so I sewed all the way around this, the perimeter of this, the interfacing, and if I look on the back, I can actually see my sewing, and that's important because we need to be able to do that. So at the end, we have a line to cut by. If we don't have this sewed on with a different color, it might be a little bit harder to see where you're sewing. All right, so the first thing that I did is I already took care of doing this before we got on camera, is I chose my fabric and I went ahead and cut it out and put it in numerical order. The pattern is going to give you the dimensions that you need to cut each one of your bags for. All three of them are different. They're not the same. What's really great is I did use my pins that have numbers on them so that it's easier for me to come in here and line everything up. So this is number 1. So I'm actually going to put it facing up on number 1 here. All right, so number 2, see it has the number 2 on there. All right, see it goes right here. But what you're going to do is you're going to flip this over and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from this right here. So something that you need to understand is that these lines are not necessarily the lines that you're sewing on. It's not a reference, it's just a reference line for you to line it up. You're actually going to be a 1/4 inch away from that. So I'm going to take it over here real quick and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch. And that's where this foot is really helpful to have it. So I'm going to take it over here and I'm going to start off the edge and I'm going to sew over the edge too. So a 1/4 inch foot, if you're not familiar with one that doesn't have the guard, my 1/4 inch is actually right there. You do not need to do a knot stitch or a backup stitch on that. You can just sew right through it because you're going to wind up sewing over these anyway. All right, so I'm going to cut it. All right, and then I'm going to take it and I'm going to pull it this way and I'm going to open it up my seams and then I'm going to just do a finger press. This is really great time to use one of your steam or your seam rollers. If you have one, you can press that open even more. All right, so now this is number 2, so I'm gonna go grab number 3 and I'm gonna do the exact same thing. All right. As you can see, we just can keep continuous sewing down. This is very similar to like foundation paper piecing. So if you know how to foundation paper piece, then this is pretty much the same thing that you're doing here. So I wanted to point out something on here is, as you notice, this one's getting bigger as you go down here. So you need to make sure you're really careful about your placement of your next piece. So what I do is I put it facing up to make sure it's going to cover everything that I need here. And it does. So I just want to make sure that I flip it over. And then I'm going to sew it. I'm going to double check one more time just to make sure that I have enough on both ends. And I do. All right. And so now I'm going to sew it. So remember, you're sewing with the face down, your like sides together. All right. We'll just keep doing this. And we'll be right back. So now that we got one side done, looks really nice, we're going to do the other side. And if you notice, I haven't done anything other than just sew it and then finger press it down. You don't do any other sewing on it yet. So we're going to start over here on the other side, and this is where it's really nice when you have it already numbered, so it doesn't take as long to figure out which piece goes where. All right, we'll get back with you in just 1 second. So now I'm on my last strip that I'm going to sew on this. And so just sew across. And it's okay to sew over your line, so don't worry about that if you happen to do that. It's okay, because it's going to wind up getting cut anyway. All right, so I've sewed both sides now. I'm going to open it up. All right, so as you can see, I've got both of them done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this back to the iron real quick, and I'm going to press it for a second, and then I'll come back and show you the next step. So we're back now. We just got through sewing everything, and I just give it a good pressing just to make sure everything was nice and flat. So the very next thing I want to do is I want to go in and pin all the way around the outside edges so that the edges are secure. And then you're going to flip this over, and you can see here all my piecing here. And then what I'm going to do is just go slightly in from my outside sewing line that I did to begin with, my first step, and sew it again so that I can secure my edges of my project. So I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine after I finish my pinning and do that, and then we'll be back with you with the next step. All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm just sewing around the perimeter of my original sew line. It doesn't have to be a 1/4 inch. I'm just kind of using my judgment here. I'll start it a little bit big there, but using the judgment of my foot, and I have like a little line here I'm just kind of following. So I'm going to go and just sew up to that point, and I'm going to do this all the way around. And what this is going to do is it's going to help me secure my stitches on the front. It's going to help me secure my fabric on the front. So I finished sewing around my perimeter of where I sewed before, but before we start cutting this, I want to go ahead and do my circle. So I'm going to do the exact same procedure as I did on the other, on this here. I sprayed my spray on here, my basting spray, and attached it to the back. So this is going to be the inside of my bottle holder. And then I need to do the bottom. So again, I need to sew all the way around this circle so I have a reference line to see. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick. So I sewed around the perimeter of my circle, and if you notice there is an X mark here. Well, it's really hard to see that X when you're putting the top on here, so I like to go through here and I'm just clipping my edges up to that X so that I can see where to do my X at. It just makes it a little bit easier on me. You can also use a marking pen too to help you do that. So I do that, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to position this on top of it, and then I'm going to sew around it again, all the way around it. And that's just so that I can secure my top. All right, so I sewed around the inside again so that my the bottom of my bottle holder is done. But now I need to sew my X's. And so I've got the little clips here so that I can see where they're at. So basically I'm just going to sew straight lines from one X to the other. You can use a decorative stitch if you'd like to on this. Again, this is going to be the bottom of your holder. It just makes it easy to, makes it secure and won't make it move or anything like that. So that's the reason why I'm doing the X. So I'm going from where I snipped it so I could find it to the other snip. So I can have a nice, even sew here. And the reason why I do this is because we're actually going to use this X here to position it onto the bottom of our bag when we get there, our holder. All right, so in just a few minutes, we'll meet you over at another table. We're going to do some cutting, and I'm going to show you how to cut on a bias so that we can cut our binding on a bias. All right, so we're continuing our project here. So what I am going to do now is I'm going to turn this over, because if you remember, my original line was where I sewed around the outside edge, and the secondary line here is where I secured the front of my all my sewing pieces that I did before. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut in between these two. I'm going to cut and leave the inside one because that's what's holding my fabric down. So just do the best you can and not cut the stitches. And if you do, it's not a big deal because you're going to wind up sewing over it anyway. So I'm going to do this all the way around, and I'm going to do this with my circle as well. Alright, so I've got my project finished. I cut it out. As you can see, it's secured all the way around on all the sides. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing for my bottom. I'm just going to cut out the outer circle and leave the inner circle so that we have a nice clean project here. And I will give you a little hint. All the 2 bottle makers I've made so far, I cut my circle a little bit smaller than what the lines were on it, just so that it would fit perfectly when I start putting it on the bottom. So we have everything cut out, it's ready to go. So the next step that we're going to do is we need to put our bias binding around the edges of it. So I'm going to show you really quickly how to cut on a bias. And the reason why you cut on the bias is because this is a curved surface and you need that bias binding so that it kind of stretches a little bit with you. So basically, I've showed you this before, but this time we have a smaller piece of material, so I'm not going to do all the fancy folding because I want just enough to do. I only need to put binding on this section of my project. I don't need a lot of bias binding. So the first thing I did here is I laid my fabric out straight, and I found my 45-degree angle here on my ruler. I'm going to show you how to cut the 45-degree bias. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my fabric out nice and flat, and then there is a 45-degree mark on your ruler here, and it goes this way. So I'm going to line it up to the top of my fabric here. And I know that a lot of people, we don't make the bias binding because it gives you a lot of waste. Well, that's what we got to do though. So I go ahead and I cut it at a 45 degree, which I've already done here. So I got that cut at 45 degrees. And all biases, all binding is, at least the binding I make, is usually 2.5 inches. So all I'm going to do now is just make a couple of strips of 2.5 inch cuts. So I've already got my 45 degree here cut. I'm going to count over 1, 2.5, and I'm going to cut a strip out. And I'm going to do this enough to where I feel like I have enough for my project. And let's just do one more to grow on just in case. All right, so how do I know it's on bias? Because it stretches. And so that's really important. You need to make sure that you're cutting it on the bias so that it has a little bit of movement when we sew our pieces together. All right, you're going to sew your binding together just like you do all your binding, and then you're going to attach it to this portion of our project. And we'll come back and we'll do that for you in just a minute. All right, so I got my binding done and I went ahead and sewed it on to my project. So when you do binding, you sew it on, if you're gonna machine sew it, you sew it on the back and then you flip it over and then you sew it on the front. So after you put your binding on, what you're gonna do now is you're gonna piece your carrier together. So what I want to do here is I want to line up my 2 binding strips here, make sure they're nice and neat. I would pin this or use binding clips to hold it together, and then make sure the other side's in good shape too. And then I'm going to just sew a straight line down the seam here. So I'm going to go do that real quick, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to put the bottom on, and then we're done. So I took it over to the sewing machine and I sewed my sides together. This is an excellent time if you have a serger, if you want to finish off these edges and do a little bit of serging. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip it inside out. All right. So I got this really nice, look at this bag, isn't that nice? Looks really nice, a little holder. All right, so the next step we're going to do is we need to attach our circular bottom. All right, now this becomes a little tricky, but remember we put these X's on here, so that's really going to help you to line it up where it needs to be wound up or lined up. All right, we already got our halfway mark here on both sides. Now we need to find our halfway mark here. What I would do is mark it with a pen, so that you kind of have that, just so that you can pin it back on there, or you can use a marker and mark it so you have the line. All right, and then all I'm going to do now is I want to make sure that the outside is in the direction I want, and I'm going to take my X's, the X that I made, and I'm going to line it up inside this. Now, there's going to take you a little bit to get it exactly where you need it. So again, all I did was I sit here and I worked with it until I got it in it like I needed to by lining my X's up. All right, and I just keep doing this all the way around, doing this one too until I get it in there just like I want it. And then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and then I will piece it again. A helpful hint here is a zipper foot would make this a lot easier when you're sewing your bottom on. So after you sew your bottom on, bam, you have 2 or 3, you should have 3 when you're all done, finished bottle carriers. So again, you know, this one, we'll just set it up. So here's our 3 bottle carriers. Took me about 45 minutes to do this project. Won't take long at all. So if you have any questions, you know we're here at Fort Mountain Quilting. We'll always be glad to help you. All right, so here at Fort Mountain Quilting, we believe in doing what makes our hearts happy. So long for now, and I will see you